Hello, my name is Sophia and I am an artist. This is my channel, Faye Art Stuff, and today I want to talk about art style and comparison, whether it's from yourself or others. Everything that I'm going to talk about is mostly in my opinion. This isn't really necessarily a true instruction on how I found my art style, but I did want to talk about this because it is something I'm questioned about a lot whenever I am interacting with people out in the real world and my art is involved somehow. A quick note about the painting. This painting I am so geniusly calling Trout because it's just a painting, a bunch of trout. It's not realistic in any sense. I just really like the designs on that particular type of fish, so I painted a bunch of fish with those designs. You would never see trout swimming in this manner because they don't live in water that deep. But it was a really fun experience, and it took me about 8 hours to complete. It's made with Arteza acrylic wash and Winsor Newton student grade tube watercolors. And then also on, I want to say 30% hot press watercolor paper. 30% cotton hot press watercolor paper. And it's also all acid free paper as well. Okay, let's get started. What really is an art style? So I guess we can start by trying to define that properly. Now, the official definition of an art style is the visual appearance of a work of art, which is determined by the artist's choice of color, form, composition, and technique. It can also refer to the artist's signature style in visual arts. It is the distinctive way in which artists expressed their vision and portrays their subject matter. What do people mean when they say they want one? A lot of times when you hear people say they want an art style or they're looking into developing one or they're working on honing it in so that they have a distinct style, what they're really looking for is art that they can create and perceive as good to what their personal standards of good art is. There's probably a better way to word that, but typically they want it to be visually unique enough in a way that it can be identified as their own to other people and they can look at it and recognize it is made by a particular artist, in this case, them, of course. And those really aren't the same thing. I'm kinda gonna get into that. Continuing on. Do you really need an art style? Should you be worried about developing one? A lot of artists really want to have a distinct art style, and in that I feel like most emerging artists and even sometimes professional artists end up putting themselves in a box, and it has the potential to really limit their growth. In the beginning, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I don't really think you need one to start with either. Art is expressive in many ways. It can sometimes be something simple and impressive on a technical level or more complex in the technique. Or, sorry, I said that wrong. It can be something more complex but doesn't use a lot of technique and is actually quite straightforward. Your choice of subject matter and expression doesn't need an identifiable art style to make it good. Your art is an extension of your life and is meant to be lived. You constantly grow and change as a person, and that is reflected in everything you do, including your art, visual or otherwise. I don't think an art style is integral to good art or for somebody to be an established artist or for them to be considered successful or even skilled. I don't think that artists should be concerned with developing one, and I think they should be concerned in developing just their overall skill. It's not a bad thing to have an art style, but it doesn't make you a better artist just because you have one. And it's not really something that I believe you should focus on. what I think you should be focusing on is using multiple medias and learning your fundamentals, consuming art media. I think some of the best ways to develop your skills as somebody, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't really make fan art, but I think one of the best ways is to make fan art, because all you're doing is creating using your creativity and passion because you felt inspired by another work of art. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a visual work. It can be literary as well, or even musical. For example, a lot of Arcane fan art is made in the style of Arcane. And when you're doing that, you're essentially doing a master study because you are studying the techniques of the artist who created the animation, and whether you're recreating a scene. And I know there for a while it was a trend to draw yourself as an Arcane character, and I loved that. I loved all of the stuff that I was seeing on social media during that time. It was really cool to see so many people express their passion for a particular piece of media by placing themselves into the same style. And you're developing new skills when you learn that style. Master studies don't need to be boring. Like, if you don't like the idea of copying Van Gogh, then don't copy Van Gogh. Pick your favorite animation or artist. It can be from a comic book if you want. Like, it doesn't have to be some type of Renaissance painter or classical artist. And then also, like, let's be real, most people making fan art aren't just recreating a scene beat for beat. You're creating something new, and that also takes a new level of skill that you can be developing. A fandom that I'm actually a part of, and one of the few fandoms that I have made fan art for, funnily enough, does not, or it did not have official art when it was like coming out. It's a podcast, Welcome to Nightville. There was no official art style. Just kind of gives vague descriptions in the beginning. Not over here telling you super detailed descriptions and how you need to draw something for the fan art. And guess what? Some of the fan art made for Welcome to Nightville is some of the most amazing pieces I've seen. I also just personally don't understand the obsession with having one. You know, like, you don't need an art style, because I have a pretty distinct style. And I would say when it comes to the art that I share and sell, that stuff, even if it's a little bit more abstract, you can tell it's made by me. And I won't lie, it's super cool when I've done a market and then months later somebody sees me at another event and they recognize my art, or they seen my stuff on Instagram, whether it was the promotionals for the event or they follow me because somebody else they knew shared my art, and they see me at the event, and there's that cool moment where they kind of mini fangirl about seeing something that they seen online in person and getting to meet me, even though I am not some famous artist. But a bunch of the stuff that I don't really share is completely different. My current project that's not really ready to be shared is similar to my art that I've made for years, but it doesn't look like any of the art that I would sell or post on Instagram. I also can do more realistic stuff. I have different types of landscapes. I have a wide variety that I can create within my skill set. It's just the art that I present to the world is relatively cohesive in some way. And that doesn't make the stuff that I share better. I'm just trying to become an artist as a profession, and part of doing that is branding. So the stuff that I share isn't my messy sketchbook faces that have horns and are melting in this super ink style. One thing that is noticeable about my art is the color, and my use of color is very distinct. But the truth is, my use of color is actually quite limited when you consider what I would prefer, because I'm working with supplies that I have. I'm using Arteza art supplies a lot that I got for Christmas when I was in high school at like 14, and I'm currently 21 now. I would love to have more variety in undertones and mixing colors, maybe even take into account the pigments and how opaque or transparent they are, because that can affect the result of mixing. I only really have mixing colors for my acrylic and latex paints. I don't have convenience colors. I have a transparent and an opaque ultramarine blue. Same for red and yellow. Then I have a magenta, a cyan, white, and black. And it's just large quantities of those colors. I mix all of the individual colors for any of my acrylic paintings. So I'm just mixing the colors I have to make all of my color palettes, and then when you take that information and you think about my art and you go, oh, well, Sophia's art has all this color and she uses all these different types of color palettes, blah, blah, blah. That's not a characteristic of my art. Well, it is a characteristic, but it had to be developed because of the materials I have access to in combination with my skill in creativity, which, yes, can be equated to a style, but that's not the point I'm going for. The point is that it's not necessarily an artistic choice. It's an identifiable characteristic born out of necessity. Because if there were to be a few more options in pigments and hue in my paints, would open up so many more opportunities for my skill just in color alone. It's one of the things I don't really want to brag about, I guess. I know a lot about mixing when it comes to mixing colors and how the pigment and whether or not the paint is a transparent or opaque pigment affects the end result and how that paint layers over other colors. It's probably the fundamental I am most familiar with is color. So I try to use color a lot in my art because it's one of the few skills that I wouldn't say I've mastered, but have the most practice in. So that's going to bring me into my next thing, which is how to develop an art style. Artists are just thinking of what they want, which is a recognizable style to them, so anyone can look at a piece and go, oh, I know who did this painting, which can be a really good thing, but it isn't necessary. Again, it's also not bad to want it. Everyone wants to try so hard about making their style, and the only way you're going to have art that is recognizable to you in that way, and what most people are looking for, and also having the actual definition of an art style type of way, is if you master your fundamentals and you consume art. The definition tells you how to develop it right there. It's again the visual appearance of a work of art, which is determined by the artist's choice of color, form, composition, and technique. It's the way that artist has expressed their vision and how they choose to portray their subject matter of choice. And what do I mean by that? As far as the consume lots of media. I consume lots of media, and I'm a huge fan of everything art. My life is entrenched with color and music. I love animation and comic books. I have 2 huge bookshelves in my living room right now filled with fiction, nonfiction, comics, stuff from when I was a child, even stuff I read now. I love comics in various art styles. I will read a comic sometimes simply because I think the art style looks cool, and I want to see how the author is going to use that in their storytelling. I just love to surround myself in art, and that doesn't also necessarily mean what I would think of as art, because on that bookshelf is also movies, and movies are a great way to have references where you have additional context. And what I mean by that is still shots where you don't have to interpret what is going on in the shot because the movie is going to show you more, even if there's some interpretation, because Not all movies are blatantly telling you, but they're telling you more than a still painting would in most cases. My favorite director is actually Wes Anderson. I love his use of color. I love his classic symmetry shots that he's known for. They're very recognizable in all of his films. I also just love the music soundtracks that go along with his films. I have most of my favorite films, which are also made by him, have the soundtracks like saved on Spotify, and I listen to them quite frequently. Studio Ghibli is another one that I see artists particularly reference. And yeah, it's animation, so it's not necessarily like the whole live action point, but it is another example of using a visual media that has movement like a live action film would, and using that as reference. But that I mostly see done by gouache artist. But it doesn't have to be. You can do oil, pastels, color pencil. Particularly though, when it comes to Wes Anderson. His films are great for studying composition and color, particularly. I would love to actually elaborate on that a lot in using film as art studies and the various ways that you can do so. But that would be like an entire video in itself, probably. And this really goes for all art creation, any creative writing class that you're going to take, they will tell you a good writer reads books. And you know what? A good artist, they consume art media, whatever that may be. I love to listen to music. I am very inspired by music. One of my favorite things to do when I'm feeling very blah or I'm just going through a rough time is to listen to music and sit down with art supplies and do something. Paint, even if I'm going to paint over it with something else later. It doesn't matter. I need to sit there. That is my therapy, is listening to music and painting. But also, it's really good to be experimental with your art supplies. Use supplies that are outside of your comfort zone, and you will develop your own personal skills. You will get your own personal technique. Practice leads to improvement. The more that you use supplies, you are going to improve in that supply, particularly. You're going to learn things with trial and error that you otherwise would not have learned. And there's only so much you can learn when it comes to videos and books in classes. A lot of it, you just need to use the materials yourself. Also, use your art supplies wrong. Like if somebody says, oh, you can't use alcohol markers this particular way because the color will be all streaky. Well, who says it can't look streaky? Maybe you do a streaky layer and then you do another streaky layer with a completely different color that over with color pencils. Look, you've created your own technique. Something that you do that other artists don't do because it's the wrong way to use that particular supply. My only colored pencil piece that I bring with me to art markets and everyone compliments, it's even my profile picture on Instagram. It's not done using colored pencils in the way that you're technically supposed to. You're supposed to use colored pencils on a smooth paper. I used cold pressed watercolor paper, and if you know anything about that, cold pressed watercolor paper is the textured kind. It's what you typically think of when you think of watercolor paper. I also used a cheaper art supply. It's mostly done with Crayola color pencils. There's a little bit of using like the Prismacolor color pencils towards the end, but it's just mostly Crayola on a textured paper, which they're super waxy and typically you can't get a very nice and even blend, or what you would consider to have a nice and even blend. And also the textured paper comes into play. You can't really tell on the girl herself because there's just so many layers, and I used color, like different in between colors for everything. Also, I just kind of want to say this. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself. I'm constantly doing things that I would think would typically lead to a dramatic improvement, and every time I learn a new skill, but that's not normally how it happens for me. Um, Slowly over time, I learn a bunch of different skills and improve, and then randomly one day, when I'm creating something new, it's just this huge jump. It's way beyond anything I've been creating before. And I have to deal with, oh, wait, well, now like, then I have to deal with, oh, well, now I feel like all of the art I had before looks like crap, but like, it doesn't look like crap. It's good. And it's good that you're growing and you're improving, and not everything you make is going to be better than the last thing that you make. There are sketchbook pages in my like everyday brain dump sketchbook that look amazing, and then there are some paintings that I make that are absolutely no, and I just cover them up later. I mess up my anatomy all the time. A key characteristic of my skeletons, a key characteristic of my art is skeletons. I just finished a painting that I had to redo the skull like 4 times. You know, I've only been painting them since I was like 14. I've been trying to draw skeletons since I was as young as 6. And I still had to redo the skull 4 times on this last painting. And that's okay. That's fine. Sometimes you're also just having an off day. Sometimes you're trying to create, and what you're creating just doesn't meet your personal expectations. But the truth is, if your goal is to have a distinct style and you're constantly comparing yourself to other people who do have distinct styles, whether it's because you look up to them or they're one of your peers, you aren't going to find your own style, because now there's this new level of pressure, whether you realized it or not, that you're putting on yourself. So that kind of directly goes into how comparing your art to others can lead to mental blocks and eventually art block. You know the classic saying, comparison is the thief of joy, and if you're constantly comparing yourself to these established artists, it will negatively affect your art point blank. Like, it's gonna have an effect on you. Because if you're too busy comparing yourself to other artists, whether they are on the same path or part of their journey, whether they are more established, if they are younger, if they have more skill, if they have less skill, but are more creatively driven, it does not matter. If you're comparing yourself to other artists, you will never reach your full potential because you're too in your head and you're too busy thinking about what other people are doing. And it's just not good for you, honestly. Something else I wanted to touch on is when others compare your art to another artist. That's kind of a broad blanket statement, so I'm gonna elaborate just a bit. But say you're in an art class in high school, not everyone in there takes art seriously as somebody else who would be wanting to develop a style. There are some people who just appreciate art. There are people who just want to take the credit. Um, but they might look at your art, or even somebody from an outside perspective, like a family member or someone in your working environment might see your art and dismiss the value of your art based on its appearances to particular styles. A lot of people outside of art spaces or even in art spaces don't consider art to be valid if it is not a classical type style, if it's not realism, sometimes even like the medium that you use. I've had people tell me that my art is not technically difficult enough to be considered a skill because I typically use watercolors, and that even children can use them, which is true. Which is like, yes, children can use watercolors. That's why I typically recommend for beginner artists to use watercolor. Watercolor is a very flexible and diverse medium. It's great for learning how to use color mixing. It's great for having to use different techniques about your brush pressure as well as layering. You can do so much with watercolor. But that doesn't mean that because it is an easier medium to learn, that it is not technically difficult or using any type of skill, or that you lack a developed skill because that is your preferred medium over something like oil paints. I had this one particular art teacher who didn't like any of the other students' art if it was not realism. And we bumped heads quite a bit, actually. She also was the same art teacher who said things like, you cannot call yourself an artist, you are simply a person who creates art. And that gets really interesting because I kind of internalized that a bit, and I think I was selling my art for about 6 months, and I was making enough money that I was able to not be like, I get paid from my day job, and then I have no money until the next time I get paid because everything went towards basic food essentials, care for my dog, and bills. So I had like nothing left over, and some of the money that I got from art allowed me to buy more art supplies or not have to say no to going and seeing friends simply because I couldn't afford to buy myself lunch if we went out. And where I was living when I started this, like everything's like an hour drive, so if you want to go do anything, there's no just, oh, we'll go to your place to eat and then we'll go do this instead later. All of this is to say that letting others compare you or make judgments can also be the same as comparing yourself if you let it get to you. And there are about 1,000 quotes out there to prove that creation and expression are what make art, well, art. So I guess those are my thoughts on those topics. I do really want to make more of the tutorial type things for your skills and fundamentals and art studies, even just teaching yourself how to do art without formal education. And I think those are going to be like my next few videos that I do. I don't think I'm going to put a video out next week, so maybe the week after. I don't think a weekly posting schedule is going to work. I have now 2 jobs and I recently started school. Well, trade school, but still school. I hope I didn't talk in circles too much. I'm hoping to explore some of this in depth more later. I need to buy a new tripod desperately. My tripod actually broke while I was filming this painting, so yay me. I did film another video with another method, but it's not gonna work really for painting something from my desk. If you're watching this at the time of posting and you live in the Baton Rouge area, check out my Instagram. I have a market this upcoming week, and at the end of March, I will be posting information on my Instagram that will be linked in the description. If you liked the video, I would really appreciate it if you left a like or a comment or both. It really helps YouTube know that you enjoyed it. If you do want to comment, maybe you can answer some of these questions. How do you feel when others compare you to other artists? Do you have an art style? Do you want one? Do you notice changes and fluctuations in your art? Whether that is a particular style or media preference, just really anything. Do you think it's necessary to have an art style? Do you also get stuck in the comparison drain? Do other people compare your art and it annoys you? And I think that's it. Thank you for watching, and until next time, bye!